Two souls who thought they knew the meaning of friendship soon discovered that the heart has its own secret plans. What begins as laughter, inside jokes, and years of comfort slowly transforms into something deeper, something neither of them dares to name at first. But when emotions whisper louder than silence, when a glance lingers longer than it should, and when holding back becomes heavier than speaking out, friendship is no longer just friendship. It's the start of a love that feels inevitable, fragile, and powerful all at once. Jess never really thought about how much Mira meant to her until she caught herself noticing the smallest things. It was a lazy Saturday afternoon, the kind that felt like it stretched forever, and they were sitting in the corner of a quiet cafe they had been going to since college. The same little place with the mismatched chairs and the bell above the door that rang every time someone walked in. Mira was talking about her week, something about her coworkers and the never-ending projects at the office, but Jess wasn't really listening. Not because she didn't care, she cared too much. She found herself watching the way Mira brushed her hair back behind her ear when she laughed, the way her eyes softened when she leaned closer to share a joke, the way her voice carried warmth even when she was complaining. It was all so ordinary, yet Jess's chest felt heavy in a way that made her almost dizzy. She tried to shake the thought away, reminding herself that this was her best friend, her person, the one constant who had stood by her through every heartbreak and failure. That was all this was, comfort. Familiarity. She stirred her coffee as if the motion could silence the sudden rush of feelings she didn't want to admit to herself. Mira leaned forward, resting her chin in her hand, and teased Jess for being too quiet. "You always zone out on me," she said with a grin, her eyes sparkling with a kind of ease that made Jess's heart squeeze tighter. Jess laughed it off, blaming it on being tired, though she could feel her cheeks warming. It wasn't unusual for Mira to notice her moods. She always had this uncanny ability to read Jess without needing words. That closeness was what made their friendship feel unbreakable, but it was also what made Jess feel exposed now. Every time Mira looked at her like that, like she was the only person in the room who mattered, Jess had to remind herself to breathe. She hated how much her pulse raced over something so simple. She hated it, and yet she secretly loved it too. Their friendship had always been easy. Movie nights that turned into sleepovers because neither of them wanted the night to end. Long drives with music blasting, where they sang off-key and laughed until their stomachs hurt. Silent mornings spent reading side by side, no need for constant words because just being there was enough. Jess knew that people envied the kind of bond they shared, the way they could lean on each other without fear of being let down. But lately, Jess was starting to feel like she was carrying a secret even from herself. When Myra's hand brushed against hers on the table that day, just for a second, Jess froze. It was accidental, casual, the kind of touch they'd shared 1,000 times before. But Jess felt it differently now. The warmth lingered in her skin long after Mira pulled away. She tried to act normal, to nod and laugh at Myra's story, but her thoughts betrayed her. Why did something so simple make her feel like her world had tilted? Jess told herself it was nothing. Maybe it was just loneliness. Maybe it was just the comfort of knowing Mira so well that made her heart ache in this strange new way. She had always leaned on Mira through breakups, had always been the one to cry on her shoulder after relationships ended. Mira had comforted her, teased her, even scolded her at times. But what Jess realized, sitting there with her untouched coffee growing cold, was that none of those people she dated ever made her feel the way Mira did without even trying. and that thought terrified her. She bit her lip, forcing herself to smile when Mira raised her brows, asking silently if she was okay. Jess nodded quickly, brushing it off with another laugh. But inside, she was unraveling. She wanted to hold on to this friendship, to keep things exactly as they were, safe and certain. And yet, every laugh, every glance, every shared silence felt like it was leading her somewhere she wasn't sure she was ready to go. The afternoon faded into evening, the cafe lights dimming as the last customers trickled out. Mira suggested they grab dinner, and Jess agreed, because of course she did. She always said yes to Mira. Walking side by side through the quiet streets, their shoulders almost touching, Jess felt that same restless pull in her chest. She wished she could ignore it, wished she could go back to when everything was simple. But as Mira linked her arm through Jess's without hesitation, Jess realized something had already changed. Maybe it had been changing all along, quietly, gently, until it became impossible to ignore. She smiled to herself, swallowing the lump in her throat, and told herself again that it was nothing. Just friendship. Just the same closeness they'd always shared. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. Something was happening inside her heart, and whether she wanted it or not, it was only growing stronger. The days that followed carried a kind of warmth that Jess couldn't quite explain. She and Mira fell into their usual rhythm, texts throughout the day, late-night phone calls that stretched until one of them fell asleep mid-sentence, and quiet moments where words didn't matter at all. Yet something inside Jess shifted, and she could feel it every time she heard Mira's voice. It was in the way she lingered on her words a little longer, the way her laugh filled Jess with a comfort that was sharper than before, almost painful in its sweetness. She caught herself staring too long, smiling too easily, and when she was alone, she thought about Mira in ways that left her both giddy and unsettled. She tried to push it down, reminding herself over and over that this was her best friend, that what they had was too precious to risk. But no matter how much she told herself that, the feelings only grew stronger, slipping into the cracks of her heart when she least expected it. One night, Mira showed up at Jess's apartment unannounced, holding a bag of takeout and grinning like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jess, still in her pajamas and hair messy from a lazy evening, felt her heart stumble at the sight. Mira breezed in, filling the room with her energy, her perfume faint but familiar. They sat on the couch, containers spread across the coffee table, eating noodles straight from the box. It felt easy, but there was a shift Jess couldn't ignore. The way Mira tucked her legs beneath her, the way her hair fell across her face, the way she laughed with her whole body, it all made Jess ache in a way that no friendship ever had. Mira leaned against her at one point, head resting briefly on Jess's shoulder as she complained about her boss, and Jess felt electricity shoot through her. It was such an innocent gesture, so natural between them, but Jess's chest tightened like she was holding on to a secret that was too heavy to keep. Later that night, when the food was gone and the TV hummed in the background, they slipped into one of their deep conversations, the kind they had shared since the beginning. Mira talked about her fears of not living up to her family's expectations, about how she sometimes felt like she was pretending to be stronger than she really was. Jess listened, eyes soft, feeling the urge to reach out and take her hand. She didn't, though. Instead, she nodded, reassured her, told her she was more than enough. Mira's eyes glistened as she smiled, and for a moment Jess thought she saw something there, something unspoken, like a mirror of her own feelings. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving Jess wondering if she had imagined it. As the days turned into weeks, Jess began noticing how natural it felt to think of Mira first in everything. When something good happened at work, her instinct was to call Mira. When something bad happened, Mira was the only one she wanted to hear. Even in the quiet moments, sitting with her morning coffee, walking home from the train, her mind wandered back to Mira. It wasn't that she hadn't always been important to her, it was that the importance now carried weight. It felt like Mira was stitched into her every thought, like her presence had become essential in ways Jess couldn't explain. And with that realization came fear. Fear that these feelings would ruin what they had, fear that Mira didn't feel the same, fear that she was reading too much into every smile, every touch, every long glance that lingered just a little too long. One evening, they found themselves lying side by side on Mira's bed, staring at the ceiling, music playing softly in the background. It wasn't unusual for them, they had shared beds countless times during sleepovers, trips, nights when one of them needed comfort. But this time felt different. Jess was hyper-aware of the distance between them, of how her arm brushed Mira's when she shifted, of how the quiet seemed charged with something unsaid. Mira turned her head at one point, her eyes catching Jess's in the dim light. For a second, neither of them spoke. Jess's heart pounded, every instinct telling her to look away, to laugh, to say something that would dissolve the moment. But she didn't. She held Mira's gaze, and in that silence, her chest felt like it was breaking open. Then Mira smiled softly, almost shyly, and turned back to the ceiling. Jess exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath the entire time. That night, Jess lay awake long after Mira had drifted off. She watched the rise and fall of her friend's breathing, listened to the quiet rhythm of her sleep, and felt something inside her shift completely. She could no longer deny it, what she felt was not just friendship. It was bigger, heavier, deeper. It was love. And the truth of it scared her more than anything ever had, because loving Mira meant risking everything. It meant putting their years of closeness, trust, and comfort on the line. But as she lay there in the quiet glow of the night, she knew there was no going back. Whatever this was, it was already part of her, and pretending otherwise would only break her from the inside out. Jess had always been good at hiding her feelings, but lately it was becoming harder. Every time she and Mira were together, the emotions she had tried to bury kept bubbling up to the surface, demanding to be felt. She told herself she could control it, that she could keep everything the same, but one afternoon, it all cracked. They were sitting in Mira's living room, scrolling through their phones and laughing over memes when Mira casually mentioned that one of her coworkers had asked her out for drinks. She said it so lightly, like it was nothing, and maybe to her it really was. But to Jess, it felt like the ground shifted beneath her feet. A dull ache pressed against her chest, and for the first time, she realized just how deeply she hated the thought of Mira with someone else. Jealousy hit her so suddenly that she didn't even recognize herself. She forced a smile, nodded like it didn't matter, but her stomach was in knots. Mira noticed something change instantly. She always did. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, tilting her head, her brows knitting together in that way that always showed her concern. Jess waved her off, muttered something about being tired, but her voice betrayed her. Mira let it go for the moment, but Jess could feel her gaze linger, studying her like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Jess wanted to run, to escape the weight of it, but instead she sank deeper into the couch, hiding behind her phone, pretending to scroll while her thoughts spun wildly. She imagined Mira smiling at someone else, laughing the way she laughed with her, leaning close the way she leaned close with her. The images hurt more than she expected, sharp and unrelenting. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that she had no right to feel this way, but the ache refused to leave. That evening, when she finally got home, Jess paced her apartment in restless silence. She hated how consumed she felt, hated that her emotions were betraying her so openly. She tried to reason it away, it was just fear of losing Mira's attention, just insecurity, nothing more. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. This wasn't about losing attention, it was about losing something more precious, something her heart had been clinging to quietly for years without admitting it. She wanted Mira in a way she couldn't keep denying anymore, and that truth terrified her. She buried her face in her hands, frustrated at herself, wishing she could just go back to the safety of being just friends. But once she had tasted this awareness, there was no way back. The next time they met, Jess tried to act normal, to bury the tension beneath her usual laughter. But Mira wasn't fooled. They were sitting across from each other at a diner, late at night, sharing fries the way they always did, when Mira suddenly leaned in, her voice softer than usual. "You've been different lately," she said. Jess's heart stopped. She forced a laugh, shook her head, insisted nothing was wrong, but Mira didn't buy it. "Don't lie to me," she whispered, eyes fixed on Jess with that piercing honesty that always left her exposed. Jess fumbled for words, her throat dry, her hands trembling slightly around her drink. She wanted to tell her everything, to spill the truth that had been weighing on her, but fear clamped down hard. The words tangled and died before they could leave her mouth. Instead, Jess blurted out something hollow, something that wasn't even close to the truth. She said she had been stressed with work, that she was just tired, that she didn't want to burden Mira with her mood. Myra's expression softened, but not entirely. She reached across the table and squeezed Jess's hand, her thumb brushing gently against her skin. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" she said, and Jess almost broke right there. The warmth of Myra's touch seared through her, unraveling her defenses, making her wish she had the courage to confess. But she only nodded, plastered on a smile, and told her she knew. The rest of the night felt heavy for Jess. Every laugh felt forced, every smile a cover for the storm inside her. She hated herself for holding back, hated how much she wanted to reach out and close the distance between them. She walked Mira home, their arms brushing as they walked in the cool night air. Mira chattered about something funny that had happened at work, and Jess nodded, responding when she could, but her mind was elsewhere. She was drowning in the pull of emotions she couldn't escape. When they reached Myra's door, Mira hugged her tightly, longer than usual, resting her head briefly on Jess's shoulder. Jess froze, her heart racing, her arms wrapping around Mira almost automatically. For that brief moment, the world felt right, safe, complete. And yet, as Mira pulled away with a smile and said goodnight, Jess felt the emptiness return, heavier than before. That night, lying awake in the dark, Jess realized she couldn't keep this up forever. The lies, the smiles, the pretending, it was already breaking her apart. But the thought of losing Mira, of ruining the only thing that had ever felt truly steady in her life, kept her silent. So she turned on her side, staring into the shadows of her room, and promised herself she'd find a way to bury the feelings deeper. Still, as much as she tried, she knew the truth. The more she tried to push Mira out of her heart in that way, the deeper she seemed to fall. Days turned into weeks, and the space between Jess and Mira began to feel fragile, as if one wrong word might shatter it. Jess tried to hide the storm inside her, but Mira could sense the distance, and it gnawed at her. She was too perceptive not to notice when Jess's laughter didn't reach her eyes or when Jess changed the subject too quickly to avoid something real. They had always been able to talk about anything, and now Jess's silence felt like a wall Mira didn't know how to climb. One evening, Mira called Jess out of the blue and insisted they spend the night together like they used to. Jess hesitated, her chest tightening with all the emotions she was desperate to suppress, but she couldn't say no. She never could. When Jess arrived at Myra's apartment, she found her already in the kitchen, surrounded by a small mess of ingredients. Mira grinned sheepishly, flour smudged on her cheek, as she waved a wooden spoon. "Remember when we tried to bake those cookies in college and almost set the fire alarm off?" she said. Jess laughed, the memory flashing vividly in her mind, two younger versions of themselves, laughing so hard they cried, standing in a smoky kitchen with burnt cookies that no one could eat. The nostalgia softened something in Jess's chest. Mira pulled her in, handing her a whisk, and for a moment, it felt like old times. They worked side by side, measuring, stirring, spilling flour on the counter. The kitchen filled with laughter, and Jess almost forgot the heaviness that had been clinging to her. Almost as they waited for the oven timer, they sat at the table with cups of tea. Myra's eyes lingered on Jess, her smile fading into something gentler, more searching. "You've been holding back from me," she said quietly, not accusing, not angry, just honest. Jess froze, staring into her cup, her heart pounding. "I don't know what you mean," she muttered, but her voice betrayed her. Mira reached across the table, her hand covering Jess's, warm and steady. "You don't have to pretend with me," she whispered. Jess looked up, and in that moment, she felt stripped bare. There was nowhere to hide. Her throat tightened as she tried to find the words, but everything inside her tangled into knots. She wanted to say she was fine, to laugh it off again, but the weight of Myra's touch and the openness in her eyes made it impossible. "There's just something I can't explain," Jess said at last, her voice breaking slightly. The silence that followed was thick, charged with something unspoken. Mira didn't let go of her hand, didn't press her for more. She just held it, as if silently telling Jess that whatever it was, she didn't have to face it alone. Jess's chest ached with the weight of it, the longing to spill everything and the fear of what it might do to them. The timer buzzed, breaking the moment. Mira stood, squeezing Jess's hand before pulling away to check on the cookies. Jess sat frozen, her hands trembling slightly, her mind a blur of fear and relief. The heaviness in her chest didn't leave, but the way Mira had looked at her, gentle, patient, unafraid, stayed with her like an echo she couldn't ignore. They pulled the cookies out, laughing at how uneven and messy they looked, just like before. They ate them warm, sitting close together, brushing shoulders. Every touch, every glance, every shared laugh felt louder than words, as if the silence between them was saying all the things Jess couldn't. Later, as they curled up on the couch to watch a movie, Mira rested her head against Jess's shoulder. Jess stiffened at first, then slowly relaxed, letting herself sink into the comfort of it. The scent of Myra's hair, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of her body, it was too much and not enough all at once. Jess stared at the screen, but her mind was somewhere else entirely, lost in the possibility of what might be hiding beneath all these unspoken moments. She wanted to turn her head, to press her lips to Myra's hair, to whisper the truth that was breaking her apart inside. But she didn't. Instead, she sat perfectly still, her heart racing, her hands clenching into fists in her lap. When the night ended and Jess stood to leave, Mira walked her to the door. For a moment, neither of them moved. Myra's eyes lingered on her, soft and unreadable, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Jess opened her mouth, then closed it again, the confession burning in her chest. Mira smiled faintly, whispered goodnight, and stepped back. Jess walked away with her heart in pieces, torn between the safety of silence and the unbearable pull of the truth. The night air was cool, but inside she felt hot, restless, consumed. She knew something was shifting between them, whether either of them admitted it or not, and it left her both terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Jess woke up the next morning with a heaviness in her chest she couldn't shake. The memory of Myra's hand on hers, the softness in her eyes, the silence that had stretched between them, it all kept replaying like a song stuck on repeat. She went through the motions of her day, coffee, emails, errands, but everything felt dull, muted, as though her world was waiting for a moment that hadn't happened yet. By the time evening came, she found herself standing in front of Myra's apartment door without even fully deciding to go there. Her knuckles hovered for a second before she finally knocked, her heart pounding so loudly she thought Mira might hear it through the door. Mira opened it with a surprised smile, her hair pulled up in a messy bun, wearing a sweatshirt that looked far too big on her but made her seem softer somehow. "Hey, I wasn't expecting you," she said, stepping aside to let Jess in. Jess's throat felt dry as she walked inside, her hands stuffed deep into her jacket pockets to keep them from trembling. They sat on the couch, Mira tucking her legs underneath her as she asked about Jess's day. Jess answered, but her voice felt distant, her mind trapped in the weight of the moment she knew she couldn't run from anymore. The silence between them stretched again, heavier this time, almost unbearable. Mira leaned forward, searching Jess's face. "You've been carrying something," she said softly. "I can feel it. Please don't keep pushing me away." Her words cracked something open inside Jess. All the fear, all the longing, all the restless nights she had spent rehearsing confessions she never said came rushing up at once. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but her voice broke before the words could form. She looked down, her hands twisting together in her lap, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Mira reached out, gently prying Jess's hands apart, lacing her fingers through hers. The warmth of that simple gesture made Jess's eyes sting with unshed tears. "I'm scared," Jess whispered at last, her voice so quiet it barely filled the space between them. Mira squeezed her hand, her expression soft and patient, waiting. "I'm scared of losing you. Of ruining us. But I can't keep pretending anymore." Her words hung in the air, trembling and raw. Mira tilted her head, her brows furrowing, her lips parting as if to respond but hesitating. Jess forced herself to look up, to meet Myra's gaze, and in that moment she felt utterly exposed. "It's you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's always been you." The world seemed to still. Myra's eyes widened slightly, then softened, a slow, almost trembling smile tugging at her lips. She didn't look shocked, not really. She looked relieved. Like she had been waiting for this moment too. She leaned closer, her voice barely more than a breath. "Do you think I don't feel it too?" The word sent a shiver down Jess's spine. For a moment, she just stared, disbelieving, her heart stumbling over itself. Myra's hand tightened around hers. "I've been terrified of losing you too. That's why I never said anything." Tears welled in Jess's eyes, a rush of relief and fear colliding all at once. She let out a shaky laugh, half sob, covering her mouth with her free hand. Mira smiled through her own tears, reaching out to brush her thumb gently across Jess's cheek. The touch was tender, grounding, and for the first time in weeks, Jess felt like she could breathe again. "So what now?" Jess whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of the question. Myra's eyes softened further as she leaned closer, resting her forehead gently against Jess's. "Now we stop hiding," she said quietly. It wasn't a dramatic confession, no sweeping declarations or grand gestures. It was soft, fragile, and trembling with truth, but it was enough. Jess felt something inside her finally unlock, years of denial and silence melting into a single moment of honesty. She closed her eyes, leaning into the closeness, feeling the warmth of Myra's breath on her skin. Her heart still raced with fear, but beneath it was something stronger, hope, certainty, a quiet knowing that this was where she was meant to be. They stayed like that for what felt like forever, foreheads pressed together, hands entwined, hearts pounding in unison. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was full, alive, speaking louder than words ever could. Jess realized then that love didn't always come with fireworks or chaos. Sometimes it came quietly, like a secret unfolding in the softest of ways. And sometimes, it was born in the space between two people who had always been meant to find their way to each other. The days after their confession felt like walking through a world painted with brighter colors. Everything seemed to carry a new kind of weight, a sweetness Jess had never experienced before. When she woke up in the morning, her first thought was Mira. When her phone buzzed, her heart leapt at the possibility of seeing her name on the screen. The simplest things, sharing a joke, brushing hands, even sitting in silence, now carried an undercurrent that made Jess's pulse race. And yet, alongside the joy, there was a fragile kind of fear, a whisper in the back of her mind reminding her how much there was to lose. The friendship they had built over years was now something more, and while it filled her with happiness, it also carried the risk of heartbreak that felt heavier than anything she had ever known. Their first morning together after that night was strangely ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Jess had stayed over, not for the first time, but it felt different now. When she walked into Myra's kitchen, still groggy with sleep, Mira was already there, hair messy, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. She glanced up and smiled, a quiet smile that seemed to reach straight into Jess's chest. "Morning," she said softly, sliding a mug across the counter. Jess murmured her thanks, fingers brushing Myra's as she took it, and that single touch made her skin buzz with awareness. They didn't need to say anything more, the silence between them felt safe now, no longer heavy with secrets but with something tender and real. As the days went on, they began to navigate what this new closeness meant. It wasn't just about whispered words or quiet touches anymore, it was about learning how to carry this shift into their everyday lives. When they walked through the park one evening, Myra's fingers slipped into Jess's without hesitation. Jess froze for a split second, her heart hammering, before she let herself relax into it, holding her hand tightly as though she never wanted to let go. The world around them kept moving, people passing by, but in that moment, Jess felt like she and Mira were standing in their own little universe. Still, a flicker of anxiety crossed her mind. Would people notice? Would they judge? Mira seemed calm, but Jess couldn't silence the voice inside her that feared being seen, feared that what they had might be exposed before they were ready. Mira squeezed her hand gently, as if she sensed her unease, and whispered, "It's just us. That's all that matters." At dinner with mutual friends a few days later, Jess found herself hyper-aware of everything. The way Mira laughed at her jokes, the way Myra's knee brushed hers under the table, the way their eyes met across conversations. She wondered if anyone else noticed, if their shift was obvious. She wanted to shout it out, to claim it proudly, but at the same time, she wanted to protect it, to keep it fragile and safe until they were strong enough to face whatever the world might throw at them. Mira seemed at ease, her hand brushing Jess's briefly when no one was looking, her smile steady and reassuring. It gave Jess courage, even though her chest still swirled with nerves. Later that night, back at Myra's apartment, Jess confessed her fear. "What if people don't understand?" she asked quietly, staring at her hands. "What if this changes everything, not just for us, but with everyone else too?" Mira sat beside her, slipping an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "People will always have opinions," she said softly, "but they don't live our lives. We do. And I'd rather face everything with you than hide what we have." Jess's throat tightened at the certainty in her voice, the quiet strength that steadied her. She leaned into Myra's embrace, breathing in her warmth, realizing that this was the kind of love she had always longed for, one that didn't just make her heart race but made her feel safe enough to be herself. Their relationship became a balance of joy and vulnerability. Jess marveled at how even the smallest details felt transformed. The way Mira curled up against her on the couch, the way her laughter filled a room, the way she absent-mindedly reached for Jess's hand while talking, it all felt like magic stitched into ordinary moments. But beneath the magic, there were conversations that made Jess's heart ache. They spoke about their fears late at night, lying side by side, staring at the ceiling. Jess admitted how terrified she was of losing Mira, how fragile she felt stepping into something so new and yet so important. Mira admitted her own fears too, that love had always seemed complicated, messy, something she wasn't sure she deserved, but with Jess it felt different. It felt worth the risk. One evening, after a long day, Jess found herself sitting across from Mira at the kitchen table, the air filled with the smell of takeout food they hadn't touched yet. Mira reached across, taking Jess's hand, her thumb brushing lightly over her skin. "We don't have to have it all figured out right now," she said gently. "We just have to keep choosing each other." The words sank into Jess's chest like an anchor, grounding her. She nodded, tears stinging her eyes, and squeezed Myra's hand back. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about the quiet courage of staying, of loving, of moving forward together even when the path felt uncertain. Jess realized then that love wasn't about perfection or certainty. It was about showing up, day after day, even when fear whispered in the background. It was about small gestures, a shared smile, a hand held tight, a whispered reassurance in the dark. And as she looked at Mira, her heart full to the brim, she knew that no matter how much doubt or fear she carried, this was worth it. Every risk, every moment of vulnerability, every leap into the unknown, it was all worth it, because it led her here, to Mira, to a love she had never dared to imagine but could no longer live without. There was a certain ease that settled between them once the initial weight of confession was behind them, but that ease came with a kind of intensity Jess had never felt before. Each moment they spent together carried a gravity that was both comforting and overwhelming, as if every touch, every word, every laugh was stitched into a larger story neither of them wanted to end. They began to carve out little rituals without even meaning to: quiet mornings over coffee, late-night walks when the city was hushed, shared meals where the food mattered less than the way they leaned across the table toward one another. What once had been habits of friendship were now steeped with a deeper tenderness, and Jess found herself treasuring the smallest things. She loved how Mira absent-mindedly tucked her hair behind her ear when she was focused, how her laughter filled a room with light, how she sometimes reached for Jess's hand even in the middle of telling a story, not because she needed to but because it had become natural. One Saturday, they decided to cook dinner together at Jess's apartment, something they had done countless times before. The counter soon became a mess of vegetables, spices, and half-used utensils, but neither of them cared. Mira sang softly as she chopped onions, her voice low and soothing, and Jess found herself watching more than helping, her heart filling with the simple joy of having her there. When Mira caught her staring, she teased her gently, nudging her shoulder, but Jess only smiled, unwilling to look away. Later, when they sat down at the table with mismatched plates of food, Jess felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't about the meal, it was about the way Mira looked at her across the table, steady and warm, like there was nowhere else she'd rather be. As the night wore on, they curled up together on the couch, their legs tangled, Mira resting her head on Jess's chest. The glow of the lamp bathed them in soft light, and Jess felt the steady rise and fall of Mira's breathing against her. Her hand drifted to Mira's hair, gently brushing it back, her fingertips lingering without thought. It struck Jess then how natural this had become, how right it felt to hold her like this, as if her arms had been made to fit around her. The fear that had haunted her for weeks seemed quieter now, replaced by something gentler but no less powerful, a love that was not fragile, but strong, enduring, alive. In that moment, Mira shifted, looking up at Jess with eyes that held both vulnerability and certainty. She didn't speak at first, just searched Jess's face as though committing every detail to memory. Then, softly, she whispered the words that Jess's heart had been aching to hear but had been too afraid to imagine. "I love you." The words were barely above a whisper, but they landed with the weight of something undeniable, something that changed everything and yet confirmed what had always been true. Jess's breath caught, tears burning her eyes as her chest swelled with emotion too big to contain. She cupped Mira's face in her hands, her voice trembling as she whispered back, "I love you too." The world seemed to pause then, holding them in a cocoon of stillness, as if nothing else mattered beyond those words. They didn't need grand gestures or promises shouted into the night. The quiet truth spoken in the dim light of a living room was more powerful than anything else Jess had ever known. She pressed her forehead to Mira's, their breaths mingling, and they both laughed softly through tears, the kind of laughter that comes from relief, from joy, from finally finding what you had been searching for all along. The rest of the night unfolded in a kind of dreamy haze. They talked in low voices about everything and nothing, their fears, their hopes, their memories of how long this love had been building between them even when they didn't name it. Mira admitted she had noticed the way Jess looked at her long before either of them confessed, but she had been too afraid to believe it. Jess confessed how she had spent nights lying awake, torn apart by the fear of losing what they had. They laughed at their mutual stubbornness, their shared silence, and the irony of having spent so long hiding from something so undeniable. As the hours slipped by, they found themselves wrapped in each other's arms, not needing sleep, not needing anything else beyond the closeness they had found. Jess marveled at the way love had crept into their lives quietly, gently, until it bloomed into something unshakable. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, it was built on years of friendship, of trust, of knowing each other better than anyone else. And now, with those 3 words spoken, it felt like everything had fallen into place when the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Jess closed her eyes, holding Mira close, her heart full to overflowing. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to question what she had, didn't feel the need to guard her heart or hold back her truth. She felt safe. She felt seen. She felt loved. And as she drifted into sleep with Myra's warmth pressed against her, she knew with certainty that this was the beginning of something endless, something that would carry them forward into every tomorrow yet to come. The days that followed seemed to stretch like golden threads, weaving a life that felt fuller and richer than either of them had dared to imagine. Jess woke each morning with a quiet sense of wonder, as if she were stepping into a world where everything familiar had been reshaped by love. Simple routines carried new meaning. A shared breakfast wasn't just about coffee and toast, it was about the way Mira hummed softly as she spread jam on bread, the way she looked at Jess with sleepy eyes that still managed to shine. Walks in the park weren't about exercise anymore, but about the feel of Myra's hand sliding easily into hers, about the way their steps fell into rhythm without thought, as if their bodies already knew how to move together. Every little thing became a memory in the making, each moment a piece of their forever. But love wasn't only light, it brought with it challenges that tested their strength and the depth of what they shared. Jess found herself struggling one afternoon when an old friend, unaware of the changes in her life, casually asked about guys she was dating. The question hit her harder than expected, and she froze, unsure whether to speak the truth or deflect. Later, when she recounted the moment to Mira, her voice carried a tremor of guilt and confusion. "I wanted to say you, but I was scared," she admitted, her hands twisting nervously. Mira listened, her expression gentle but serious, and when Jess finished, she took her hands and held them steady. "You don't have to rush," Mira said softly. "You don't have to explain us to the world before you're ready. What matters is that we know what we are." The reassurance sank deep into Jess's chest, a reminder that love wasn't about performing for others, but about building something real between them. Still, both of them understood that hiding forever wasn't an option, not if they wanted their love to thrive. The first time Jess introduced Mira as more than a friend, her voice trembled, her palms slick with sweat, but she did it. The words stumbled out awkwardly, but Myra's hand on her back grounded her. And when their friends responded with warmth rather than judgment, Jess felt a wave of relief she hadn't expected. The fear of rejection didn't disappear overnight, but each moment like that carved out space for courage, showing her that love could be stronger than fear. Their relationship deepened in ways that went beyond words or public gestures. There were quiet nights when they lay together in silence, the world fading away as they breathed in sync. There were arguments too, sharp edges where their fears collided, but even those became a testament to their bond. They didn't walk away. They stayed, they listened, they learned to see each other not as perfect but as whole. Jess realized that love wasn't about avoiding conflict, but about choosing each other through it, about finding softness even in hard moments. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Myra's apartment, the city lights glittering below, Jess felt something shift inside her. The air was cool, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic, but the moment felt still, almost sacred. Mira leaned against her, head resting on her shoulder, and Jess felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude. "Do you ever think about how different life would be if we never figured this out?" she asked quietly. Mira was silent for a moment, then she lifted her head and met Jess's gaze. "I think about it," she admitted. "And it scares me. But then I remind myself, we did figure it out. We're here." That's what matters. Jess swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. It was true. No matter how much fear or hesitation they had faced, no matter how long it had taken them to find the courage, they had arrived at this moment together. In that instant, Jess realized that forever wasn't some faraway dream. It wasn't about grand promises or perfect plans. Forever was built in the daily choice to love, in the small acts of care and trust, in the way Mira reached for her hand without hesitation, in the way their laughter filled a room, in the way they showed up for each other when things weren't easy. Forever was happening already, woven into every glance, every word, every quiet night spent side by side. As the night deepened, Jess leaned in and kissed Mira softly, the city buzzing below them, and felt a calm certainty settle into her heart. The years of friendship that had carried them here, the fear and longing that had nearly broken them, the confession that had changed everything, all of it had led to this love, steady and true. And for the first time, Jess no longer wondered if it would last. She knew it would, because they had chosen it, and they would keep choosing it every day. The journey from friendship to forever wasn't about reaching a destination, it was about walking together, step by step, hand in hand, into whatever life would bring. And as Jess looked at Mira, her heart overflowing, she knew with absolute clarity that this was only the beginning of their story, a story they would write together for the rest of their lives.